They threatened to stage a car crash in the heart of Prague. Can you imagine that moment of sheer disbelief when rumors start circulating that foreign diplomats might plan such a stunt? Yet that is precisely the inflammatory claims surrounding representatives from the People's Republic of China, who allegedly followed and intended to physically intimidate Taiwan's vice president, Hsiao Bi-Khim, during her visit to the Czech Republic in the early 2024 year. What really happened, and why is this story sending ripples across international politics? Today, we will untangle every twist in this riveting saga and explore the deeper implications for diplomatic relations between Taiwan, the Czech Republic, and Beijing. Prepare yourself, because this is not just a standard political news bite. This is a tale loaded with tension, intrigue, and the potential to reshape how nations interact on the global stage. In this episode, we will uncover the details behind Vice President Hsiao's dramatic visit, examine the accusations of intimidation tactics, and assess the larger context behind the intensifying standoff between Taiwan and China. By the end, we will see how the events in Prague have the power to echo worldwide, pulling back the curtain on an undercurrent of tension that few have truly recognized. So, what is at stake here? And how did one small European nation's choice to receive a representative from Taiwan turn into allegations of planned physical intimidation? In the next few minutes, we are going to answer those burning questions. We will delve into what Taiwanese officials have said, investigate Beijing's denials, and discuss how the Czech authorities responded when diplomatic rules were allegedly breached. We will also explore the historical underpinnings that left a rift between Taiwan and China, plus the possible motives fueling China's intensified actions. In addition, we will address that perplexing question: why would anyone think that staging a so-called demonstrative crash would change the course of established policy? Stay tuned as we examine whether these revelations represent a unique incident or a reflection of a broader pattern of intimidation. And we will ask ourselves, is this new reality something that European nations can afford to ignore? Before diving into the heart of the drama, let us spotlight the central character, Vice President Hsiao Bi-Khim. She is no stranger to diplomatic complexities, holding a position that demands both vigilance and careful maneuvering. In her home region, Taiwan has long struggled with how best to represent itself on the international stage. Beijing insists that Taiwan be considered part of China, a stance that has historically restricted Taiwan's diplomatic freedoms. Nevertheless, Ms. Hsiao's visit to Prague was intended as a demonstration of Taiwan's aspiration to strengthen bilateral ties with European partners, even if it means navigating delicate waters. But no one foresaw how tense that navigation could become, especially when Czech military intelligence declared that Chinese diplomats had supposedly gone beyond standard surveillance methods. According to these intelligence sources, the Chinese side did not merely follow Ms. Hsiao with some discreet tale, but took their so-called vigilance to disconcerting levels. Military intelligence even suggested that a demonstrative car crash could have been in the works. The unspoken subtext is ominous, a scenario where an abrupt collision or staged traffic incident might intimidate a visiting politician into compliance or silence. Or perhaps the intention was to send a broader message, dissuading smaller nations from forging independent ties with Taipei. The Czech officials found this scenario so concerning that they communicated formal rebukes to the Chinese embassy. Yet the official response from China was one of firm denial. Beijing insisted that it never directed its envoys to engage in wrongdoing and, in turn, criticized the Czech Republic for endorsing separatism by hosting Vice President Hsiao at all. Let us pause to reflect on the broader historical context. Taiwan's unique political status traces back many decades. As the Chinese Communist Party established the People's Republic of China on the mainland in the mid-20th century, Taiwan developed separately, evolving into a self-governing democracy. Beijing, however, persistently maintained that Taiwan must be unified with the mainland, by force if necessary. Tensions have often flared, and the competition over diplomatic recognition is unrelenting. Many Western democracies opt to engage with Taiwan on trade and cultural exchanges, while stopping short of establishing formal relations. The Czech Republic is one such country that does not have official ties with Taipei, but occasionally hosts Taiwanese officials, thereby ratcheting up friction with Beijing. This friction is precisely why the notion of an attempted intimidation tactic resonates so strongly. It is not just a minor traffic violation if the animosity is fueled by a decades-long conflict. Now, Imagine being in the car with Vice President Hsiao as her entourage glided through the historical streets of Prague, likely focusing on forging cultural or business links and attending meet-and-greet events with local political figures. Suddenly, a car rumored to be carrying Chinese diplomats runs a red light and nearly collides with her vehicle, echoing the allegations that unscrupulous tactics might be at play. No wonder Ms. Hsiao took to social media afterwards, asserting that such acts would not intimidate her and praising the Czech authorities for safeguarding her delegation. It was a bold move for a political figure from a region that is used to walking the tightrope of global recognition. That is our first huge reveal. Physical intimidation on foreign soil, whether real or threatened, has spurred conversation across continents about respect for national sovereignty and diplomatic norms. If you appreciate the candidness of this coverage, do not forget to show some love by sending a positive sign, like a thumbs up or a share. This helps us continue exploring critical stories that others may hesitate to touch. In the aftermath of the widely circulated allegations, American lawmakers also weighed in, condemning what they called an example of coercion by the Chinese government. The United States House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee flagged this incident, labeling it a shocking display of improper conduct. But from Beijing's viewpoint, Ms. Hsiao's presence in the Czech Republic itself was a provocation, an incursion into China's internal matters, as recognized by the One China principle. By that logic, Chinese diplomats were not engaged in intimidation, but were rather reacting to Czech actions that Beijing deems offensive. According to spokespersons at China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, their diplomats follow international rules and regulations diligently. They maintain that the Czech authorities are overreacting or using misinformation to create hysteria. There is another dimension to this story: Europe's overall changing stance on China. For years, European nations have weighed economic interests against concerns about human rights abuses and authoritarian practices. Recent events, various allegations of economic bullying, controversies over investments in critical infrastructure, and tensions over intellectual property have prompted some European countries to reassess their relationships with Beijing. The Czech Republic in particular has experienced a diplomatic chill with China. Further complicating matters, Czech politicians have sometimes made high-profile visits to Taiwan, an open defiance in Beijing's eyes. In that light, it is no surprise that the arrival of Ms. Hsiao in Prague was a magnet for controversy. Indeed, many wonder whether the allegedly planned intimidation was a form of retribution or a symbolic display aimed at discouraging further interactions with Taiwanese representatives. To maintain a sense of fairness, consider the perspective from the Chinese side. Beijing steadfastly warns its diplomats to ensure Taiwan does not gain recognition as a separate state. From Beijing's vantage, any act that might signal such recognition is cause for potential diplomatic pushback. The question is, where is the line between legitimate protection of national interests and intimidation that violates international norms? For the Czech Republic, hosting Ms. Hsiao was a matter of free choice. But for Chinese officials, it looked more like an infringement upon sovereignty claims. This clash underscores the tension fueling the entire East-West dynamic, with Taiwan trapped at the intersection. However, the talk of a so-called demonstrative car crash feels like it belongs in a spy thriller. Could it be that these allegations were exaggerated, natural misunderstandings inflated by feverish concern? Or was a more sinister plot actually being concocted behind closed doors? Czech public radio news outlets have taken these suggestions quite seriously, citing credible intelligence sources. Conflicting with those claims, Chinese diplomats in Prague firmly protested, labeling the accusations baseless. For Ms. Hsiao, the entire situation has elevated her global platform, allowing her to highlight how Taiwan has long grappled with the threat of intimidation. If indeed government officials from China planned, or even joked about orchestrating a collision, it would mark a new low in an already fraught relationship. Let us not forget that this incident is part of a broader drama in which both Taipei and Beijing regularly engage in rhetorical battles and strategic maneuvering. While no actual crash occurred, the climate of tension it suggests has serious implications for future diplomatic visits. How do European capitals plan to protect visiting Taiwanese leaders without fueling further confrontation with the Chinese missions stationed there? Will we see more sophisticated infiltration tactics from either side, or perhaps a call for official oversight to ensure a more regulated environment? The question of Europe's role in the cross-strait friction between Taiwan and mainland China is increasingly pivotal. Some countries may feel reluctant to get involved, citing trade ties with Beijing. Others might see an ethical imperative to stand by a smaller, self-governed democracy facing pressure. The Czech Republic, historically known for charting its own path in foreign affairs, has definitely signaled that it will not be easily deterred. Despite the tensions, we have seen Czech politicians continuing to engage with Taiwan, sometimes defying conventional wisdom about the dangers of angering Beijing. This balancing act demands that smaller nations weigh moral stances against national interests, a tightrope that can be precarious indeed. From Ms. Hsiao's vantage point, adversity can be harnessed. When she publicly tweeted that the Chinese Communist Party's unlawful activities would never block her from representing Taiwan's interests on the world stage, the statement resonated, especially among those who champion democracy. But it also underscores the communication strategy at play. Taiwan depicts itself as an underdog nation valiantly standing up against a much larger neighbor. If Ms. Hsiao's expression of defiance captures attention in world capitals, it could pave the way for a shift in how Taiwanese dignitaries are received globally. Some speculate that further overtures toward Taipei might be welcomed more widely if smaller countries, inspired by the Czech example, decide that forging direct connections with Taiwan is worth the risk. Yet, what about the ramifications for Prague in particular? If Chinese diplomats were truly found to be operating outside acceptable norms, the Czech Republic faces the challenge of deciding how firmly to penalize them. Do they ask for a recall of the individuals allegedly involved, or merely issue a censure? According to official Czech statements, they already summoned the Chinese envoy to lodge a protest. Meanwhile, concerns over espionage, infiltration, and under-the-radar influence campaigns have grown in many parts of Europe. Often such concerns end up overshadowing or complicating discussions about trade or cultural ties. If proven true, the planned car crash fiasco will only intensify suspicions, making it far more difficult for Beijing to salvage goodwill in Central Europe. One wonders how the revelations might influence others who are similarly critical of Chinese influence in various global arenas, from technology to infrastructure investments. If the Chinese government deems that the best way to suppress Taiwanese presence is to take things to extremes, it may accelerate tensions not just between Beijing and Taipei, but also between Beijing and nations who feel that intimidation has crossed a line. And if you find this story as gripping as we do not forget to subscribe or follow for more deep dives into the kind of international intrigues that rarely get the spotlight they deserve. This saga is a reminder that the interplay between local governments, superpowers, and disputed territories can be more dramatic than any spy novel. As the uproar continues, Ms. Hsiao has repeated her gratitude toward global parliamentarians who stand against violence and coercion. She has insisted that Taiwan will not be isolated by intimidation, linking the events in Prague to broader struggles for recognition between Taipei and capitals around the world. She also praised Czech officials for guaranteeing her safety, underscoring that their protective measures reinforced a message about the sanctity of diplomatic visits. More than that, she challenged the very idea that brute force or clandestine tactics can stifle Taiwan's will to be heard. From her perspective, the attempt, whether real or rumored, backfired spectacularly by generating a wave of sympathy and rallying more supporters to her side. To add a layer of complexity, Europe's stance regarding matters in East Asia does not revolve solely around Taiwan. Europe's relationships with China date back centuries, steeped in trade and cultural exchange. But as Europe's unity grew in scope, it adopted collectively a more critical lens on issues like human rights, trade imbalances, technology transfer, and economic interventions. For countries such as the Czech Republic, the question becomes, are they ready to risk potential fallout in order to stand up for what they perceive as a moral stance, supporting a democracy that Beijing sees as illegitimate? The answer evidently leans toward yes, based on their unwavering welcome of Ms. Hsiao, even under the potential threat of orchestrated intimidation. Furthermore, when the Czech authorities say they have concrete evidence of Chinese diplomatic wrongdoing, the burden of proof is substantial. If intelligence agencies can present convincing documentation, perhaps dashcam footage or eyewitness accounts from Ms. Hsiao's security team, Beijing may find it harder to dismiss each new piece of evidence as propaganda. Conversely, if the Czech government cannot provide definitive proof, Critics might claim that the accusations were sensationalized to justify stricter scrutiny of Chinese influence. The line between rumor and verified fact is razor thin, making the entire ordeal that much more compelling to watch. China's official statements continue to stress that Chinese diplomats have always abided by the laws and regulations of the countries in which they are stationed. Beijing has also insisted that Ms. Hsiao's presence in the Czech Republic contravenes the One China principle by implying recognition of Taiwan as a standalone diplomatic entity. The intrigue intensifies because if Beijing truly believed Ms. Hsiao's visit constituted a violation of their sovereignty, does that in any way condone measures taken to shadow or even intimidate her? Modern diplomatic codes, as codified in international treaties, forbid foreign missions from threatening or endangering the safety of public officials, especially on the host nation's soil. Consequently, if these allegations hold weight, they point to a blatant disregard for protocol. And that is the heart of the conundrum. Ms. Hsiao came to Prague not to sow discord, but to strengthen Taiwan's global ties. Yet the claims of something as extreme as a planned kinetic demonstration overshadow any notion of a routine diplomatic trip. This is not only about Ms. Hsiao or even Taiwan alone. It is about the responsibilities that diplomatic missions bear and the extent to which nations push boundaries to shape how they are perceived. If subterfuge or intimidation becomes normalized, it may set a precedent for a world in which smaller states have little recourse against more powerful adversaries. The dynamic is reminiscent of Cold War tensions, albeit in a new context, with different players. Indeed, for Europe's growing alliances with Taiwan, this episode could accelerate discussions around stronger joint security protocols and intelligence sharing agreements. In Taiwan, the incident has also fueled domestic sentiment in support of Ms. Hsiao. The Mainland Affairs Council lodged a vigorous protest, demanding an explanation and apology from Beijing. Though high expectations of any truly conciliatory gesture from Beijing remain unrealistic, the official condemnation signals that Taipei considers these intimidation tactics unacceptable. It also underscores a broader strategy of naming and shaming, shining a spotlight on Beijing's alleged wrongdoing in hopes that external political pressure might spur some restraint in the future. The fear among some analysts is that incidents like this can spark a tit-for-tat escalation. If the Czech Republic imposes new rules or constraints on Chinese diplomatic activities, Beijing might respond by restricting Czech businesses in China or imposing other penalties. Global relations, especially where Beijing is involved, can involve layers of financial leverage that overshadow moral or political disputes. The question becomes, will the Czech stance embolden other nations to follow suit, or will they shrink back in fear of potential economic repercussions? As the dust settles, it is worth pondering how Europe's stance towards both Taipei and Beijing will evolve. While the European Union as a collective body frequently treads carefully around cross-strait affairs, individual member countries have in recent years felt emboldened to carve out more independent approaches. Lithuania is another example, having openly strengthened ties with Taiwan and witnessed swift Chinese retaliation. The Czech Republic may find itself next in line for blowback, but it might also find solidarity among other European partners who do not want to align entirely with Beijing's worldview. Some see these developments as a sign that Europe's strategic autonomy is on the rise. For Ms. Hsiao, the entire episode has arguably boosted her profile, both within Taiwan and globally. When you stand up to intimidation, even alleged intimidation, it can galvanize supporters who resonate with a David versus Goliath narrative. Whether that moral high ground translates to tangible benefits for Taiwan remains uncertain. After all, realpolitik often demands compromise. Still, Ms. Hsiao's defiance underscores a growing impatience among Taiwanese leaders who feel that incremental concessions to Beijing have not truly lessened tensions, nor have they expanded Taiwan's global standing. The spotlight remains on the Czech government too, as watchers wait to see how far they are willing to go in investigating, verifying, or publicly admonishing the people involved. Undoubtedly, this is not the final chapter in the evolving thriller that is Taiwan-China relations. We can expect more diplomatic visits, more bluff and bluster, and perhaps deeper alliances forming as Taipei pursues a path to broader international recognition. The events in Prague, dark as they are, serve as yet another data point in a pattern of increased scrutiny toward China's overseas behavior, be it alleged intimidation of protesters, frowned upon police stations operating covertly in foreign cities, or efforts to silence critics abroad. Each case is somewhat unique, yet they all feed the narrative of an unyielding Beijing determined to enforce its worldview by all available means. Whether you believe the specific claims about a staged demonstration in Prague or suspect they might be inflated, the bigger takeaway is clear. There is a growing chasm between Europe and China over how to engage with Taiwan, and that chasm will not be closed easily. Decision-makers in capitals from Prague to Brussels to Washington must decide how to respond. Do they treat this as an outlier event, or does it signal a deeper shift in the lengths to which Beijing might go? If we have learned anything from the global stage in recent years, it is that small gestures can have outsized ripple effects, especially when they touch upon sovereignty issues. So, there you have it. A swirl of accusations, denials, and high-stakes diplomacy, all revolving around a single trip by a Taiwanese vice president to a city that prides itself on cultural openness. Far from being a mere sidebar note in global politics, the alleged intimidation in Prague could very well mark a tipping point, reaffirming Europe's willingness to accommodate Taiwanese emissaries while intensifying a standoff with Beijing. And if we step back, it becomes a microcosm of an even larger dispute, a modern incarnation of the ideological struggle that shapes alliances, trade deals, and strategic decisions around the planet. Perhaps the coming months will reveal more details, or maybe they will remain forever in the shadows of classified intelligence. Either way, we will be watching closely. One last friendly request before we wrap up. If this deep dive into the hidden corners of international diplomacy has sparked your curiosity, consider sharing this episode with a friend who loves untangling political controversies or exploring the shifting allegiances of our global community. Every share helps keep these nuanced stories alive, because, let's face it, the next time a major official travels abroad, we will wonder, who is tailing whose car, and to what extent are they willing to escalate? Stay tuned for more, and remember that what may sound improbable today might just be the new normal tomorrow.